Hey y'all, welcome to Sandy's Library. I'm Sandy.
And I'm Sara. In this video, we're going to take a look at Session 3 of the raw material.
And don't forget about our dogs. You may hear them walking around, moaning and groaning, flapping their ears, and other shit like that. So please ignore them. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. This is the Law of One, Session 3, original recording date, January 21st, 1981.
I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the one infinite creator. I communicate with you now.
Q&A number 1. Question. My first question is, did we correctly perform the ritual for starting the communication?
I am Ra. The placement of the artifacts designed to balance the instrument should be placed at the instrument's head for the least distortion of effect. The remainder of the beginning account of purpose is quite acceptable for those speaking desire to serve. Otherwise, the intended emphasis in mind complexities would not have been effected properly. We caution you to guard against those who are not wishing to serve others above all else from taking part in the beginning or in lending their distortions of mind-body-spirit complex to any session, as we should then be unable to properly blend our distortions with those of this instrument.
So, no non-believers present during channelings. Got it. Okay, y'all. So I've got just one thing to point out about Q&A number 1, where they say, otherwise, the attendant emphasis in mind complexities would not have been effected properly. Okay, the transcript says effected, but on the tape, Carla clearly says affected. And you know, those two words have very different meanings. Affect is usually a verb and it means to impact or change, while effect is usually a noun and it's the result of a change. Big difference there, if you know what I mean. But nevertheless, let's move on to Q&A number 2. Question. Should I move the Bible, candle, and incense at this time?
I am Ra. This would be appropriate.
Q&A number 3. After moving the items, Don says, is this the proper position?
I am Ra. Please correct the angle of the incense so that it is perpendicular to the plane of 20 degrees north by northeast.
Q&A number 4. After making the correction, Don asked, is this satisfactory?
Please check your eye to make fine correction. We will explain the process by which this becomes a significant distortion balancer. The incense acts as energizer to the physical body of this instrument, signifying its humanity. This is therefore a necessity that the wafted smoke is perceived from the same relative angle as the instrument perceives the open Bible, balanced by the lighted candle, signify love light and light love, and therefore give the mental and emotional, shall we call it, distortion complex of this instrument the sight of paradise and peace which it seeks. Thus energized from the lower to the higher, the instrument becomes balanced and does not grow fatigued. We appreciate your concern, for this will enable our teach learning to proceed more easily.
I'd just like to share my thoughts on one point about these channeled sessions. Ra instructs them to use an open Bible. That said, y'all, I feel like the Bible's purpose has more to do with Carla than Ra. I mean, they are fine-tuning Carla to receive their frequency, if you will. Nevertheless, let's move on to Q&A number 5. Question: does it appear correctly aligned now?
I judge it within limits of acceptability.
Q&A number 6. Question: at the last session, we had 2 questions we were saving for this session. One having to do with the possible capstone of the Great Pyramid at Giza. The other, and y'all, I'm sorry to say, there's an inaudible bit before Don's question picks back up with heavy blocks. I know these questions are of no importance at all with respect to the law of one, but it was my judgment, which you may correct, that this would provide an easy entry for the reader of the material. We are very grateful for your contact and will certainly take suggestions about how we should proceed with this. This is just one guess.
I am Ra. I will not suggest the proper series of questions. This is your prerogative as free agent of the Law of One, having understood that our social memory complex cannot effectually discern the distortions of the societal mind-body-spirit complex of your peoples. We wish now to fulfill our teach-learning honor responsibility by answering what is asked. This only will suffice, for we cannot plumb the depths of the distortion complex which infect your peoples. The first question, therefore, is the capstone. We iterate the unimportance of this type of data. The so-called Great Pyramid had 2 capstones. One was of our design and was of smaller and carefully contrived pieces of the material upon your planet, which you call granite. This was contrived for crystalline properties and for the proper flow of your atmosphere via a type of what you would call chimney. At a time when we as a people had left your density, the original was taken away and a more precious one substituted. It consisted in part of a golden material. This did not change the properties of the pyramid, as you call it, at all, and was a distortion due to the desire of a few to mandate the use of the structure as a royal place only.
So, I noticed that Ra thinks the info about the pyramids is important to no one but us humans. And you know, I guess that's human nature. We can't remember where we came from, so it's natural to look to our past for answers. But what I really want to know is, who took the capstone and why? Ra didn't exactly say. Now, I want to point out something that gives me pause when they said, our social memory complex cannot effectually discern the distortions of the societal mind-body-spirit complex of your peoples. Look, y'all, that speaks volumes to me. I know what I thought when I first heard them say that they cannot effectually discern the distortions of our societal mind-body-spirit complex. My thoughts were, and still are, so they're trying to recruit us. They don't even know which polarization we're leaning toward, positive or negative. But that's another rabbit hole. So I'll just suffice it to say, Ra wraps up their answer with,
do you wish to query further upon this first question?
Q&A number 7. Question. What did you mean by chimney? What was its specific purpose? Sorry guys, we found this question kind of funny. But anyways, Ross says,
There is a proper flow of your atmosphere, which though small, freshens the whole of the structure. This was designed by having airflow ducts, as this instrument might call them, situated so that there was a freshness of atmosphere without any disturbance or draft.
don't think I really need to elaborate on that, since airflow, like a chimney, is a basic concept really. So let's move on to Q&A number 8. Question. How were the blocks moved?
I am Ra. You must picture the activity within all that is created. The energy is, though finite, quite large compared to the understanding and distortion of your peoples. This is an obvious point well known to your peoples, but little considered. This energy is intelligent, it is hierarchical, much as your mind-body-spirit complex dwells within an hierarchy of vehicles, and retains therefore the shell or shape or field and the intelligence of each ascendingly intelligent or balanced body. So does each atom of such a material as rock. When one can speak to that intelligence, the finite energy of the physical or chemical rock body is put into contact with that infinite power which is resident in the more well-tuned bodies, be they human or rock. With this connection made, a request may be given. The intelligence of infinite rockness communicates to its physical vehicle, and that splitting and moving which is desired is then carried out through the displacement of the energy field of rockness from finity to a dimension which we may conveniently call simply infinity. In this way, that which is required is accomplished due to the cooperation of the infinite understanding of the Creator indwelling in the living rock. This is, of course, the mechanism by which many things are accomplished which are not subject to your present means of physical analysis of action at a distance.
Okay, so from where I'm sitting, Ross has a whole lot of nothing here. I get that they moved the blocks by thought, and I acknowledge that they went into some detail explaining how they accomplished that feat. But for the rockness to communicate with its physical vehicle, y'all, that is way more than my feeble little 3D brain can comprehend. But I do agree with my guides. Me understanding that is not important in my 3D existence here at this time. And I can and do acknowledge that Ra can do and make some pretty miraculous things happen, which is probably how they got mislabeled as gods in the first place. But let's move on to Q&A number 9. Question. I am reminded of the statement, approximately, if you had enough faith, you could say to a mountain to move, and the mountain would move. I assume this is approximately what you are saying, and I am assuming that if you are fully aware of the law of one, then you are able to do these things. Is that correct?
I am Ra. The vibratory distortion of sound faith is perhaps one of the stumbling blocks between those of what we may call the infinite path and those of the finite proving understanding.
And y'all, that's proving/understanding, which simply means that they go together, like teach, learn, and love, light, and so on. Anyway, back to Ra.
You are precisely correct in your understanding of the congruency of faith and intelligent infinity. However, one is a spiritual term, the other more acceptable perhaps to the conceptual framework distortions of those who seek with measure and pen.
Okay, so I feel like this one is one of those answers where Ra is being a little bit evasive. I feel like, though, more than confirming Don's question about the abilities of faith to move mountains, well, I feel like they were more or less confirming that our inability to have the faith required for such a feat is a stumbling block for us humans. But hey, us humans, we're still stuck in the mindset of me, 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 when we need to be in the mindset of us, us, us for something like that to happen. But anyway, let's move on to Q&A number 10. Question. Then, if an individual is totally informed with respect to the law of one and lives and is the law of one, such things as the building of a pyramid by direct mental effort would be commonplace. Is that what I am to understand? Am I correct?
I am Ra. You are incorrect in that there is a distinction between the individual power through the law of one and the combined or societal memory complex mind, body, spirit understanding of the law of one. In the first case, only the one individual purified of all flaws could move a mountain. In the case of mass understanding of unity, each individual may contain an acceptable amount of distortion, and yet the mass mind can move mountains. The progress is normally from the understanding which you now seek to a dimension of understanding which is governed by the law of love, and which seeks the law of light. Those who are vibrating with the law of light seek the law of one. Those who vibrate with the law of one seek the law of foreverness. We cannot say what is beyond this dissolution of the unified self with all that there is, for we still seek to become all that there is, and still are we Ra. Thus our paths go onward.
Y'all notice how they said only the one individual purified of all flaws could move a mountain. Well, if you ask me, that means it's going to take a pretty special someone to effect change in the here and now. And I don't know anybody like that. But I totally get what they're saying about the law of love and the law of light in their relation to the law of one. I feel like for us to become enlightened as a society so we can effectively move into a positively polarized fourth density, well, society needs to, for the most part, be governed by the law of love before we can seek the law of light. Because only when we're vibrating with the law of light can we seek the law of one. And only when we vibrate with the law of one can we seek the law of foreverness. And in this case, y'all, I resonate with the idea that to seek is to find. And it's interesting to note that they tell us they don't know what's beyond that. But y'all, that's another rabbit hole. So let's move on to Q&A number 11. Question. Was the pyramid then built by the mutual action of many of your people?
I am Ra. The pyramids which we thought built were constructed from thought forms created by our social memory complex.
Yeah, I freely admit that Ra is way more evolved than us humans. And do I think us humans will ever reach such a level of evolvement? Honestly, for me, society today is just far too judgmental to come together in such a fashion. But that's another rabbit hole. So, let's move on to Q&A number 12. Question. Then the rock was created by thought in place rather than moved from somewhere else. Is that correct?
I am Ra. We built with everlasting rock, the Great Pyramid as you call it. Other of the pyramids were built with stone moved from one place to another.
Q&A number 13. Question. What is everlasting rock?
I am Ra. If you can understand the concept of thought forms, you will realize that the thought form is more regular in its distortion than the energy fields created by the materials in the rock, which has been created through thought form. From thought to finite energy and beingness in your, shall we say, distorted reflection of the level of the thought form. May we answer you in any more helpful way?
Okay, so I take this to mean that creating a thought form is something like manipulating energy, except they do it on a grand scale. And y'all, some of my and Sarah's ancestors were said to be able to levitate tables and other pieces of furniture, among other magical feats. And we talk about all of that in our Blood Ties series. About how we believe they had figured out how to manipulate energy. And y'all, I'm still really, really mad that they chose not to pass this secret ability on down through the generations. But anyway, let's move on to Q&A number 14. Question. This is slightly trivial, but I was wondering why, in that case, the pyramid was made of many blocks rather than the whole thing being created at once.
I am Ra. There is a law which we believe to be one of the more significant primal distortions of the law of one. That is the law of confusion. You have called this the law of free will. We wish to make an healing machine or time-space ratio complex which was as efficacious as possible. However, we did not desire to allow the mystery to be penetrated by the peoples in such a way that we became worshipped as builders of a miraculous pyramid. Thus it appears to be made, not thought.
Yeah, that's what I like to call double talk. It's also one of those responses that you can take in a lot of different ways, depending upon where your head's at. So let's move on to Q&A number 15. Question. Well then, you speak of the pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid, I assume as primarily a healing machine, and also spoke of it as a device for initiation. Are these one and the same concepts?
They are part of one complex of love, light, intent, sharing. To use the healing aspects properly, it was important to have a purified and dedicated channel or energizer for the love light of the infinite creator to flow through. Thus the initiatory method was necessary to prepare the mind, the body, and the spirit for service in the creator's work The two are integral.
I just wonder, did Akhenaten have to go through all this ritual thing to blend his distortions with theirs? Things that make you go, I mean, blending distortions doesn't sound like what they were doing. And that's what they said about Akhenaten, that he had blended his distortions with theirs. But what they're talking about here sounds more like tuning Carla in to Ra's frequency to me. And while you might think those are the same thing, I see them as two completely different ways of talking to Ra. Nevertheless, let's move on to Q&A number 16. Question: does the shape of the pyramid itself, is that a key function in the initiation process?
This is a large question. We feel that we shall begin and ask you to reevaluate and ask further at a later session this somewhat, shall we say, informative point. To begin, there are two main functions of the pyramid in relation to the initiatory procedures. One has to do with the body. Before the body can be initiated, the mind must be initiated. This is the point at which most adepts of your present cycle find their mind-body-spirit complexes distorted from. When the character and personality that is the true identity of the mind has been discovered, the body then must be known in each and every way. Thus the various functions of the body need understanding and control with detachment. The first use of the pyramid then is the going down into the pyramid for purposes of deprivation of sensory input, so that the body may, in a sense, be dead and another life begin. We advise at this time any necessary questions and a fairly rapid ending of this session. Have you any query at this time space?
Seems like you had to go through a lot to become initiates of the Law of One back in the day. And it's a good thing I don't have to go down into the darkest innards of any place to be a believer in the Law of One these days. Just saying. But anyway, let's move on to Q&A number 17. Question: the only question is there anything that we have done wrong or anything that we could do to make the instrument more comfortable?
We scan this instrument. This instrument has been much aided by these precautions. We suggest only some attention to the neck, which seems in this body distortion to be distorted in the area of strength weakness. More support, therefore, to the neck area may be an aid.
Just to be clear, the terms body distortion and strength weakness, those relate to one another, just like love light and teach learn do, respectively. You can't have one without the other. Just like you can't have love without light, you can't have a body without distortion, nor can you have strength without weakness. Nevertheless, on to Q&A number 18. Question: should we have her drink the water from the chalice behind her head after we charge it, or should we use a different glass of water?
That and only that chalice shall be the most beneficial, as the virgin material living in the chalice accepts, retains, and responds to the love vibration activated by your beingness. I am Ra. I will now leave this group, rejoicing in the power and peace of the one Creator, Adonai.
They sure did put a ton of energy into fine-tuning Carla, so to speak. So I'm assuming that Carla was not a wanderer as they described Akhenaten to be. since they said he was able to blend his distortions with theirs all on his own. And it doesn't seem like Carla was able to do that. I mean, she needed tremendous help from Don and Jim. And I mean no disrespect to Carla either. It's just a simple observation. They seem to have a hell of a time fine-tuning her, so to speak. I mean, it's a well-known fact that those channeling sessions did damage to her body. In a 2009 interview, she said that the channeling sessions ate her body up. And I also got the impression from her that if she had it to do over again, she'd forego the channelings. But that's just my opinion, y'all. And it's worth noting that she died in 2015. And I do hope she knows that the sacrifice she made was not done so in vain. 'Cause I feel like people are discovering the law of one now more than ever. And all thanks to her. So, thank you, Carla. Okay, so this brings us to the end of session 3.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back soon with session 4.
Later, Gators!